says, get that India. Big boy.
Call an ambulance! Maybe call a police! Oh, what a shot! What a shot! Campbell killer!
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Tip Sheet Podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, also known as Forty20. Joining me to break down another week of NRL and Parramatta news, my good mates Sixties and Clint. Fellas, big week coming for the Eels. They go from the northernmost parts of Australia down to the southernmost parts of the mainland. Plenty of kilometres of travel, but a big game against the Melbourne Storm looms in the NRL and a big game against the Dragons in the NRLW. How you boys doing?
Mate, I'm doing really well, especially after our get-together last Friday at Big Swing Golf at Northmead. That was a really good evening with some sponsors, some Eels people, some mates. It was just, it was a fun night. Unfortunately, what happened the next day with the Eels losing, the weekend, with the Eels losing both the NRL and NRLW, it wasn't a great way to finish the weekend, but I guess that's footy. This week, is it season defining? I guess we can talk about that. We were pretty fired up after Saturday night, no doubt about that, but I think there's a chance we might still be a bit fired up tonight when we're talking about Eels news and NRL news. But anyway, Clint, how you doing, mate?
Yeah, look, I'm probably not too dissimilar, a little fired up. And, just to let you know, you boys know how far that instant reaction podcast reached. I've had Eels supporters that I know both personally and from, extension of friendship circles contact me and say they enjoyed the listen and were equally as fired up after the Cowboys game. So, if those comments are to suggest how we're all feeling, I dare, or how the three of us are feeling, I dare say it's also representative across our supporter base going into this all-important game this Friday night.
And 60s, you mentioned it in passing about our great Friday night, but a shout out to the sponsors of the show, Big Swing Golf, Northmead, and Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, NRL and Parramatta. It was really good to be able to get together and have a meet and greet with everyone there while playing some golf and some other party games and whatnot. So that was great fun. But thanks to them for sponsoring the tip sheet and helping us get the episodes out each and every week. But fellas, it's time to talk some footy and some news.
News team, assemble!
And fellas, just to start off with, just a little bit away from footy itself, most members of Parramatta Leagues Club would have received an email today just to let them know that the general meeting, which was to be held on Thursday in Parramatta Leagues Club, has been postponed. So if you're not aware of that, please be aware that general meeting has been postponed. Check your emails for more information on that. And we'll just leave that there. And the other thing, too, I want to mention before we get into the news is we published our feature story on the Parramatta House on Saturday morning. It's the house where we have 4 young players who are in the Eels Jersey Flag team who have had to relocate, all of them from Queensland during this year. And that's where the Eels look after them via the wonderful Shah and Milo and their family. We were up there for a barbecue a few weeks ago. We recorded a chat with Shah and Milo. We also recorded a chat with the 4 fellas, that being Lance, Ethan, Will, and LeBron. And it was a great day. Please read the article, our feature story. Have a listen to the podcast that goes with it, because it is a good news story. And in rugby league, we need as many good news stories as we can. Eels do a fantastic job around welfare, and this is another example of that. So, and you know what? If you enjoy it, how about sharing it with some of your Eels supporter mates as well? Let them know about it. Pass on a link or whatever that you can do just to share that story. We'd really appreciate it. And you know what? If you're an Eels supporter, I reckon that's a great thing to do anyway, just to share good news about the Eels club. Fellas, now getting into the weekend. where do we start after that Eels loss to the Cowboys? We were pretty fired up over a number of things, John. But where do you sit now that the dust has settled? Maybe the rage has quelled a little bit. Goal was quite harsh in his grades this week. I'm not sure that I agreed with all of his sentiments, but, because I found some positives out of the loss. Did you find any positives when you reflect back on it?
Oh, 100%. Like we spoke about at the time, as much as the Cowboys pride themselves on their fitness, this is twice now the Eels have really run them down massively in their home ground. And if that game goes to Golden Point, or if we just had another 5 or 10 minutes in a hypothetical thing, I think we get them easily. But again, that doesn't take away from the negatives. And then we were very critical of the team, in particular that left edge, where just for a variety of reasons, from guys I think that have probably just played a little bit too much first grade right now, to a player that wasn't necessarily match fit and then had some incredible bad luck. I mean, we've got to talk about Sean Lane later, but the poor man could not. I suppose he's catching a lot of breaks in one way this year, but he's just had awful luck. But he wasn't match fit, so his defensive reads weren't great. And then, Bailey Simonson was sort of caught in the middle of all that alongside Wonga Blake, who had a shocker. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. Wonga was just awful against the Cowboys. That was a real big negative. But, the fact that, as we've seen for pretty much the entirety of this season, bar the game against the Warriors where we were missing essentially half our starting team when you factor in injury, suspension, the state of origin, the Eels, while they haven't always been pretty and they've sometimes been far from perfect, they have fought tooth and nail in every game. Right through that awful stretch at the start of the season where we had those 3 consecutive 4-point losses, and through other games where we were in less than favourable conditions, they've managed to dig deep and be competitive. And we saw it again against the Cowboys, where that was a game that was very, very, I would have said very good odds of being a blowout at one point. And instead, they rallied. And while, yes, they didn't get the win, and it now puts them, I wouldn't say in a precarious position. There's been a lot of talk about how we're not going to make the finals now. I still feel pretty strongly that we've got not only a position where we're in control of our own destiny, but I think we're still in a good position to make a push. But obviously the game does hurt us with the Cowboys leapfrogging us. But yeah, a game that certainly has its reasons to be upset, but also, like you said, 60s, there is stuff to be positive about coming out of it.
Yeah, Clint, obviously there was no sugarcoating, as John said. The performance of the left edge, Wonga is a shadow of his former self. We have to be blunt about that. His confidence must be absolutely shattered at the moment. We saw Sean Lane really showing the effects of just not getting game time this year. Dejan he's not Dylan Brown defensively, and that probably showed up in a couple of moments during the game. And Bailey Simonson had arguably his worst game at centre for the Eels. So, acknowledging all of that, mate, were there positives that you were able to take from the loss?
Yeah, definitely. And the finish is probably a little bit more important than what people will probably give it credit for, because regardless of how the first 60 minutes unfolded, 60, 65 minutes, if you want to stretch it that far, we still only lost by 8 points, so that's, and to finish the stronger, as John was touching on, that's really something you can roll into the next game with. That's the type of energy you can roll into the next game with. And, the disappointment was that energy wasn't there from the get-go. And I think Coach Brad Arthur expressed as much in the post-game presser. But look, there's reason for optimism there. And, I think I referred to sort of the golfing analogy last week in terms of the swing. We just a couple little things, and we're good to go again. We got a really good opportunity against arguably our arch nemesis of recent years. It definitely feels that way anytime we come up against Melbourne. For me, there's certainly a side I get a little bit more aggressive when watching us play. But Yeah, I thought the efforts of Gutherson and Moses in particular in the back end of the game, obviously they were the architects of our points. And the fact that they didn't stop pushing, Will Penasini and Bryce Cartwright also, had very high effort games. Jermaine Hopgood as well through the latter part of the second half as well was pushing, probing, asking questions, and they kept coming, and that's something, we may not necessarily win every week, but when you have performances like that from players and they can carry that into, you have at least a handful of those players carrying those types of performances each week, it means you'll always be in the fight. And, as was said before, apart from the game against the Warriors where, half our side and then some were out, we've been competitive in every game. We haven't had a 13-point loss outside of that result, which is the anomaly for very obvious reasons. So this is a highly competitive side. We still have, at this particular point in time, a very good for and against. And likewise, we still have destiny in our own hands. So there should be reason for optimism, and we should be going into the game against Melbourne this week ready to take no prisoners and take control of our destiny.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the team list Tuesday selections very shortly. But whilst we were able to find some positives in the NRL loss, I'm finding it very, very difficult to find any. Well, no, I can find a couple of positives in the NRLW loss, and it was down to some individual performances. Yeah. For me, I'll just give a big tick to the back three, and you know what? Even throw in the performance of the centres in that regard. But outside of that, John, it was an ugly loss to watch, wasn't it? The NRLW loss to the Tigers first up.
Yeah, again, you can't sugarcoat this one, can't you? 60s. There was a lot of excitement and promise for our season opener here against the Tigers. That lost a lot of momentum when there was the team update 24 hours before kickoff that neither Rachel Pearson nor Elsie Albert will be playing this game. That took a lot of wind out of the sails. There's your tone setter in the middle and your general on the field. And unfortunately, our worst fears came true against this, in this one against the Tigers. And yeah, the big one here, and you can cop conceding points because, especially in a format like the NRLW where it's much more open and free-flowing compared to the NRL for the wrestling around the ruck, there's going to be a lot more opportunities to score. But and this is something that Brad Arthur always talks about, it's one of his calling cards, isn't it? The physicality and chasing the collision. We wanted none of it in this game. We weren't putting shoulders in or arm grabbing, weren't even making attempts in some instances. And the Tigers in the second half just saw that and ran away with it. And I thought the injection of one of your players, you sort of pointed out when we were chatting to Mary Kay, 60s, Losana Lutu, was huge for the Tigers. She came on and gave them a lot of direction on both sides of the ruck, playing as that sort of middle pivot. And the Eels just weren't interested in going with them set for set. And like you said, the back three, in particular, Zali Faye and Abby Church, I thought they were very good. They can really hold their heads up high. And in saying that, Chantel Stowers and Mahalia Murphy both only missed a singular tackle in a game where I think we had like 70 combined missed and ineffective tackles. Only one other player, was it Muru off the bench, I think, had 0 missed tackles. So 3 players there with either 0 or singular missed tackles, which is almost a aberration when the team was struggling as much as it was defensively. But they've got to dig deep, 60s, because they're not getting any reinforcements this week. We'll talk about that shortly, obviously. But the lack of effort, maybe, like, is it as brutal as saying as a lack of effort or enthusiasm?
I think it was. I think in your Gen and Logic column, you talked about it was just too passive in the defensive line.
Yeah, the passivity was very. To alliterate, was palpable. And the Tigers sensed it. They saw it. They knew it, and they pounced. And it's defense is honestly so much of it is just effort, isn't it? 60s enthusiasm, getting up off the line, those first 3, 4, 5 steps of line speed, taking away time for the offense to make decisions. It's about being there in support. So they just got to find that. And to some degree, they had the same issue early on last season, and towards the back end of the season, they got a lot better at it. But it is frustrating that they're sort of back to square one here, and I hope that they can make those improvements against the Dragons.
I think Zali Faye could be anything, John.
She has star potential in this competition. She is such a natural. I don't think there are many wingers that are as comfortable getting downhill and so confident in their attacking repertoire. Like, she's got the inner way, she's got the fence, she's got the speed, she goes up and climbs the ladder. Like, she's got the full bag of tricks as an attacking winger. And it's not like she's terrible in defense either, but she is just such a natural footballer.
Yeah, there was a play that she put on where the ball went out to her. This would have been it was in the second half, early in the second half, and I'm trying to think who the player was that she did the work with, but she came in field but quickly turned the ball back on the outside to the other player who.
Oh, it was a nice little wraparound, wasn't it? It was
yeah.
Oh, let me go check the team list so I can just jog my memory, because was it a centre or was it interchange player?
Interchange.
It was interchange.
It was the she scored the try in the trial. I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong. I'm just trying to think.
Monique Donovan. It was Monique Donovan. You're right. Yes, she did score. She did score the try in the trial. Yeah, that was just like the football nous, wasn't it? 60s, just to take that move and then have the little wraparound play. She, like I said, just a natural footballer, and I think her ceiling really is star potential here.
Yeah. Now, Clint, the other thing too with a performance like that is that when you've got a halfback, the team general that's out, and you're relying on that player pretty much for almost the entirety of the kicking game, because let's be honest, I think that it was going to be Rachel Pearson doing all of the kicking game, is that, first of all, you're not throwing too much in attack. And I think it's fair to say that there wasn't a great deal that the Eels threw in attack. Secondly, there was no pressure that was applied from a kicking game. They were never having to really chase back on the kicks. They were getting the ball turned over well and truly, say 40 metres out from their own line, 30, 40 metres out instead of within their red zone. So there's no questions being asked of the defence. So if the defence isn't being questioned, there's plenty of energy then left for the attack. And that seemed to be what we were seeing with the Tigers, that when it came to the fatigue part of the game, all the fatigue belonged to the Eels and nothing was fatiguing for the Tigers. And we saw them just run away with ease in that last 15, 20 minutes of the game.
You can't underestimate the mental effect that of turning the ball over in those positions consistently has on a side as well. You know, when you've busted your guts and you've had to try and earn the hard meters, and you're turning the ball over 40 meters out from your own line instead of 80 meters out from your own line, it makes it a lot harder to defend, and having to repeat those efforts becomes mentally draining, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in many ways, that you start to open up, and because the cause and effect of such, when you're defending your own line constantly like that, it not only is it physically wearing you out, but as I said, mentally draining you, and one becomes the other, and it seemed to be the way for the girls, and the stat line reads as such. Defense is obviously an attitude thing. Both of you were touching on that before with John's comments, but they need to find a way in which to manage the game without Rachel there, because like we see in the men's, Mitch's presence and kicking game is so important to that side. Likewise, Rachel to this side. Her being absent from the team sheet this week means they're going to have to find a way to not repeat the mistakes of the season opener. And may I just add, gents, all the more, I guess, sour, for lack of a better word, the loss, given the amount of former Eels that ran out in that Tigers side on the weekend.
Yeah, and a couple of them had really big games as well. So, it was tough. Moving away from the NRLW and back to the NRL, before we talk about team list selections, the signing of Joey Lussick. Quick, comments from both of you. Clint, I'll throw to you first. Your thoughts on the signing of Joey Lussick?
Absolutely pro. Very happy that this has happened. I was disappointed when Joey moved on at the end of the 21 season. He obviously had a good couple of years at St. Helens there, won a premiership and lifted the World Club Challenge earlier this year out at Penrith in a historic win for the Northern English club in the 2023 World Club Challenge. He's exactly the type of, or archetype of hooker that suits our team. He's a reliable defender, has very solid service, a handy little kicking game that can be utilised to ease pressure off the halves when they may not be options. And he's also got a lot of game awareness as well. He can sneak a try from dummy half. We've seen that a couple of times, not just for us, but also for St. Helens and Salford in his time in the Super League, and likewise his time in the lower grades throughout his career at Parramatta. There's really a lot for Eels fans to like about Joey rejoining the club, and I'm glad that this time it's on a little bit of a longer term deal because there's obviously some succession planning gone into place with this signing, and I think in terms of adding, not only will he add immediate value, he allows us to have leverage in negotiations with our succession plan in that position moving forward as some of those kids from those successful junior sides start to come through the grades.
Yeah, and I think it also frees up Brendan Hands to be more of a utility bench prospect as well, like moving forward. If it ends up being that, like Joey's starting off the bench this week, I'm just wondering whether they've got in their mind that Brendan Hands is more of that utility value than what Joey Lussick is. He can cover quite a range of positions, Brendan. He can play lock, he can play in the halves, he can play dummy half. Or even if they do keep Lussick on the bench, that if they have an injury in one of those other positions, then Brendan Hands can cover that, and Joey Lussick comes onto the field. So I think it opens up the utility value of Brendan Hands a little bit more, whether he's starting or whether he's coming off the bench. John, your take quickly on getting the signature of Joey Lussick?
Yeah, look, there's been a lot of legitimate grievances about how we've handled our top 30 coming into this season. Obviously, a lack of depth in the back line and at dummy half has sort of bit us on the backside at various times, including this week with what's happening on the wing. But this is good business. So credit to the recruitment team. They did a great job here. This was swift. It was decisive. I like the length of the contract too. Obviously, the remainder of this year plus 2 more gives Eels great security at the position for the next few years as they work on a couple of options for the juniors, including young Matt Arthur, and then you got guys like Jacob Davis, who get a chance now to develop, knowing that the Eels have no need to press them beyond what they're capable of at the time or at the time right now. So that's really good. We know Lussick is a good system fit. Did fantastic things for us in 2021, and if he was fit for that game against Penrith in the finals, there's a strong chance that history is rewritten in a significantly different way. So that's fantastic. And yeah, looking in the training gallery this week, it came out today, which is this week technically, but a poor way of phrasing it. Looks like he's slotting in beautifully. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how he and Hands work, allowing them to both go a little bit more up-tempo, given that we know that they both can play extended minutes in our system, but they'll be tasked with probably just splitting responsibilities, maybe close to 50-50.
Yeah. And I think we all were in agreement that we were probably sorry that Joey Lussick left when he was with us last time as well. So, yeah, very good signing there. Okay, John, I'm going to throw immediately back to you because there are some big selections across all of the grades, and we'll start off with the NRLW. Can you give us what's the main takes out of this week's selections? It's
a bittersweet one this week, Sixties, because the second week running, there's no marquee presences among our external recruitment. So no Rachel Pearson, no Elsie Albert. I think they both got calf injuries. So awful luck there. And with the NRLW just being 9 rounds, to have your marquee players already out for 2 rounds and not necessarily a signal that they'd be back in round 3 or 4, this is
we're heading into, like, I won't say disaster territory. I shouldn't say disaster territory, but it's not good. And
It's not
especially
good,
when you're opening the season against teams which, on paper, we should have competed quite well against, and instead it's, last week, instead of having what we thought might be a comfortable victory, we saw an absolute thrashing, and now they're playing the Dragons, who they beat in a trial, but without the players. Anyway, sorry, mate, I've interrupted there. But
I understand.
Yes.
And to make things worse, Jade Fanora, who was the backup half to Rachel Pearson, broke her hand early in that game against the Tigers, so she's out for a while now. So that really emphasises the bitter side of bittersweet, because on the sweet side, for us who have been involved in the Para Pathways and had a chance to watch the growth in the Tasha Gale, in particular 60s, we get to see another debutante out of that program this week in Rosemary Beckett, who steps in to the most important position for the Eels now at halfback, and she was fantastic just 2 seasons ago in the Tasha Gale, where she sort of spearheaded us towards our maiden finals campaign in that grade. So she created a little bit of history for the club there at 7, working alongside Talara Bamblett in the halves there, and she got a lot of pressure on her 60s. I'm not going to lie about that. She's coming into a team that needs a lot of direction. She needs to be able to kick well and effectively, organise his team and attack. I mean, the two big criticisms I had were, obviously defensively the team was at sea, but also their ends to attacking sets was just so disorganised. And obviously with no Rachel Pearson, that makes sense. But she's going to have to step into that void and make it happen. So really keen to see what she can do. And look, she's going to have her rookie lumps and bumps, that happens, but maybe she can be the spark to ignite the team. Outside of that, though, unchanged backline. We already mentioned that Church, Faye, and Toi Hiku have been 3 of the better players in that loss. Murphy and Stowers in the centres too. Pahuka Berryman Duff works with Beckett in the halves. Madeline Jones will start alongside Ruby Jean Kennard Ellis. Ruben Charrington's dummy half. Amelia Murphy, Talisha O'Neill, and Kennedy Charrington round out the back row. On the interchange, you've got Capri Paucau. Nakia Davis-Walsh makes her debut for the club, and she's an interesting one on the bench. She gives the Eels an option to play in the back row. Got a frog on my throat, sorry boys, in the back row. Technically in the back line too, but maybe also a tertiary playmaking option for the halves there. And then you got Shannon Muru and Monique Donovan rounding out the interchange. Tyler Amatu, Kyra Simon, Kimberly Hunt, Tanika Todd Hunter, and Chloe Jackson round out the extended roster. A couple of young players there in Todd Hunter and Jackson, I believe. So keep an eye on them as the season develops. But yeah, the real story this week, Rosemary Beckett.
Yeah, having seen her play, not this last year, but the previous year in the Eels Tasha Gale team, she is a talent. Like, without question, she's a talent. It was maybe she didn't feature in the immediate plans in terms of getting any sort of blooding early in the season. I think it was possibly going to be looked at as a learning year for her being part of the NRLW squad. But opportunity can be something that is the making of a player.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess we shouldn't put high expectations on her. She can have high expectations on herself. She doesn't need the fans to have high expectations. What I would say to the fans is, you are talking about a young, talented player, and I think as I said, it's a good opportunity for her to come into the team a little bit earlier than expected, and just I'd like to just see her play her natural game.
Mm-hmm.
Because she was a very composed playmaker.
She ran the team in that Tasha Gale team.
Yeah.
She was very confident, can run, kick, and pass equally well. In fact, she has what I would have considered an advanced kicking game relative to the Tasha Gale when she played in that season 60. So she's got the opportunity to.
And from memory as well, John, is that didn't she come from St. George's?
Yeah, she did. So,
Tasha Gale team, so that when she came to the Eels, that was her second season of at least of Tasha Gale. So she came as a 19-year-old into the Tasha Gale team, which is why we only saw her last season. But was from the Dragons, and as you said, really brought that composure and the game management into that halfback role in the Eels Tasha Gale team. So Yeah, look, I'm very keen in seeing how she goes this week. As I said, it's a shame that we're not seeing Rachel Pearson, and hopefully she is back soon. But my goodness, we're going to be cheering hard for Rose Beckett there. Clint, the loss as well of Elsie Albert this week. Can they overcome that also?
Well, when you lose your engine room leader, it very much becomes about sharing the load, and obviously Kennedy is the natural leader in the pack there, but some of those girls have to step up and carry the load that's left by Elsie's absence. That's part of playing a team sport, and that's certainly an important part of playing rugby league. Is that it's the next person up mentality we hear with the men's sides. It's the same here with the ladies, and they should be walking off the field from that game against the Tigers ready to go. No, you know what? That happens, but we gotta pick ourselves, dust ourselves off, and get ready to go again. And they should have a little bit of confidence, given that they beat the Dragons. I know it was a trial match, but it was only a few weeks ago that happened. They should be going in there knowing that they can compete against this side. And yeah, we have a couple of outs in two of our most important players there. But to what you boys have just said about Rosemary, be excited for a debutante that's getting their chance and going up against the might of the Dragons in this team, who in this competition, I should say, who've been a very strong team over the last few years. You know what? Let's give it to them. What's the worst that could happen?
Yep. Now, John, we've got some pretty big talking points across the other team selections this week. So can you take us through NRL, New South Wales Cup, and Jersey Flegg, the main talking points in the team selections there?
Yeah, starting with the top grade here in the NRL, boys. Parramatta Eels with one enforced change this week. We mentioned that the luckless Sean Lane. Broken jaw, torn hamstring, and now a dislocated elbow. Club has slated him to be roughly 6 weeks in recovery here, which means if the Eels do make it to the finals and get past the first week or so, they'll be back with Sean Lane in the fold, although he obviously will be short on match fitness in the time being. Andrew Davey, another timely acquisition in the mid-season for the Eels. He comes into the starting team. Otherwise, an unchanged lineup from 1 to 7 and from 8 to 13 beyond Andrew Davey, obviously there for the Eels. Brennan Hands will start over Joey Lussick, who joins the interchange bench, where Luca Moretti, Joe Fangahi, and Ryan Madison will work alongside him in rotation. Extended roster, Hayes Dunster, Makesi Makatoa, Urumu Greg boys. He's going to be in another team, too. That's very exciting. Kai Rodwell and Jack Murchie. The big talking point, though, Wanga Blake. He's on the wing. And this one, I imagine, is going to be pretty feisty among the water cooler fans throughout the week. Was it the right decision? Could the Eels go on someone else? I think they could have. I don't know what you guys think, but after what we saw against the Cowboys, I don't lightly criticise players, boys, but what we saw against the Cowboys is borderline stamp never to play first grade again. The non-effort in some of those areas cost us badly, and it's just not tenable for mine.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to justify the selection of a player who's so down in confidence that he's a shadow of his former self. I probably won't have rolled the dice and played Arthur Miller-Stephen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big call, considering I don't know that he's played wing since we would have seen him play wing in SG Ball early last season, maybe a little bit in Flegg from memory, but he's pretty much, apart from when he was out injured, his time this year, I think it's been exclusively in the fullback role. But I maybe it's too much of a jump up to expect that he would make such a climb within the one season to go from Jersey Flegg to NRL, especially when he was out for was it 9 weeks or something like that?
It was about that. But look, I'm entirely with you, Sixties. There are 3 things that have me on board with that too. Is one, even though he hasn't played wing for some time, when we did see him there playing out at Kellyville often 60s, he was a big talker. he was always yapping to his man inside about defensive alignments, who to watch out for, where to be, which is always a great starting stone for any player, but especially a fullback and a winger. 2, I think he'll bring a lot of energy, something that the Eels will always be good for. Having someone come in and just be hungry to play because it's their debut, that's big. And yeah, he'll make mistakes and whatnot, but you take that. But 3, he's fast. I mean, he's got out and out speed, and I think we're a club that, as good as our backline is, and as great as we are creating opportunities for our flankers, we haven't really had a real speedster and a chance. I mean, Sean Russell's got some legs, obviously, but he's not an out and out speedster. And I think Artie's probably closer to that. And I would have been really keen to see him down that left edge, getting the opportunity to open up a bit. So, look,
for people that are unfamiliar with Artie, all I'll simply say is I believe that he is the fastest player in the club. So he would definitely be bringing the pace aspect there. You mentioned Wiramu. Good to see him back. What about you, Clint? What would you have? Did BA have any other option other than Hughes and Wonga in your mind?
Look, probably not. And this is a really interesting. I'm going to take a little bit of a different perspective on this, but I think this is an interesting week in the coaching career of Brad Arthur and making this selection. And can he get Wonga to turn it around? He's a seasoned first grader, and while he's always been an effort and confidence-based player, can he change the mindset of someone who's quite clearly struggling mentally? And I don't think it's going to be helpful. I would strongly advise anyone listening to this who has any immediate connection with Wonga to advise him to stay off and away from social media, because some people don't know how to articulate their opinions very well and just resort to straight up abuse because it's the only way they know how to communicate, and that's not right. But it will certainly be interesting to see how it is that Brad Arthur gets Wonga up for this game. He's going down to Melbourne and playing against the might of the Melbourne Storm. These aren't any easy beats, and regardless of their own team list and them having a couple of outs, But he's a seasoned first grader as well, and he's also been paid to play professional rugby league, I should say, for a number of years now. So he's got to get his headspace right quick. And you know what? We have to back our coach in this regard, gents, because he's been coaching for well over 10 years, and if he thought that there was a better option than going with Wonga, I dare say he would have exhausted that and tried that. So I'm going to support our coach here, and I'm very interested to see what it is that he does to try and change the fortunes of Wonga in this side, because the fact of the matter is, gents, he's playing for a career at the moment, and if that's not enough to get him fired up, I don't know what is.
Yeah, and of course too, he's got that opportunity to be at least 4 weeks in first grade. At least 4 weeks in first grade, and you never know. Like, if we said it last week, that if he was able to perform, not only is he showcasing himself for potential new clubs, because I think it's fairly clear that the Eels aren't retaining him next year, but not only does he get to sell himself to new clubs, but he's also got that chance to be part of a finals campaign and give BA a selection headache. Like, geez, Wonga is playing that good. How can we drop him? Well, okay, maybe he's playing a bit better than Sean Russell, or maybe he's playing a bit better than Bailey Simonson.
Or Micah.
Yeah. So, I mean, the ball is really in his court. And but again, I'm going to echo what you said before when it comes to people's criticism. Do not get personal, people. Just don't get personal with criticism. You can say that you wouldn't want him in first grade, but we often see in social media that people cross the line and they start throwing really nasty personal jabs about people. No, jabs is too soft a word. It gets abusive, and we don't need that. And it's not. And if you're an Eels supporter, it's not going to help. If Blake's in the team, he's in the team. If he got wind of any of this, that's not going to help his mindset. And you have to think to yourself, what are you trying to achieve? Your abuse of a player is not going to change a coach's mind about who he selects. It's not going to help a player's performance. It might help you. The venting might help you to feel a bit better, but it's not going to achieve anything that you might want to have happen as a supporter. And as supporters, we all want to see winning. And I should point out as well that we've got a number of players who people might think would be better options for selections who are actually out injured at the moment. Lumi Luki's not available. Zach Sini's got a busted hand. We don't even know about the current fitness of Hayes Dunster, who has been named but wasn't able to play last weekend. So there's lots of doubts about the players that are available and that are options for BA to select. John, returning back to you, there's an absolute influx of younger players into the New South Wales Cup team at the moment.
Yeah, if you told me about 6 weeks ago that I would have been most hyped for the New South Wales Cup team was today in round 22, I would have told you you're on crack. But here we are with a massive influx of the Jersey Flag players coming into this team. And I don't know if that was a singular catalyst for their win against the Roosters on the weekend, 60s, but it sure looked to be a significant portion of it. A lot of youthful energy injected, and they responded fantastically with that 32-16 win. That's been backed up this week with more players coming into the fold. We see Charlie Guymer making his senior football debut in Open Age Rugby League. He's going to be in the starting team on the edge. Unfortunately, he is
replacing... That is significant, but that he's actually starting. Yeah. He's not being eased into it off the bench. Yeah. He's starting.
Look, obviously internally they would have had very high ratings on Charlie, but I imagine he would have turned a lot of heads of that effort in the Under-19s Origin game where he looked physical and dominant and had huge impact in a team in two star-studded teams of NRL caliber players, or NRL plus really. There's going to be some rep stars in there as well. And Charlie was fantastic, but he comes into the starting team. The only caveat to that is that he replaces another young player in Jock Brazel, who is out this week. Don't know if it's suspension or injury, 60s.
It might be an injury. I was talking to someone about it last night. Now it's slipped my mind. I'm pretty sure it's an injury, but I could be wrong.
He did score a 48th minute try on the weekend, so it would have happened after that if it was an injury. But outside of that, Arfmel Stephen at fullback, Dan Keir in the centres, a bit of a question mark on that one there, but he's in a back line that features Dunster, Loizu and Terrell Williams, another young player getting back-to-back games here. Joshua Lynn is getting another game in the Cup like Terrell Williams, so it's 2 games in a row. He is young half or 5'8" for partnering Rankin. You got Rodwell, Yates and Makatoa in the front row. Jack Murchie, who feels like our last back rower standing in terms of the depth charts right now. He's in the other slot alongside Charlie Guymer, or opposite Charlie Guymer rather. The big hyphen, Jonte Jr. Befameza continues his excellent campaign. He's starting at lock 4. You got Davis, Wiremu Greg, Nico Pello and Brock Parker on the interchange. I think we might have to call Wiremu Wolverine Greg from now on, boys, because not only has he come back from an injury that usually sidelines players for 6+ months, but he's actually coming back ahead of schedule. He wasn't due back until next week per the club reports, and here he is back playing Cup a week before. So well done, Wiremu.
Yeah. Let's hope they can build on from last week's victory because we've been waiting a while for an Eels win in the New South Wales Cup, but very pleasing to see those young players there. Clint, anything you want to add to that with the influx of the younger players into the New South Wales Cup?
I'm just going to echo what we've been saying all throughout the year, beginning with the junior representative season, as players have progressed through to flag and now on to Cup. It is a great showcase of the talent that's been building and developing inside our club, and that they've played all their football through the Eels grades, and long may it continue.
And finally, John, we get to the Jersey Flag, and I just want to say from watching that game that they played against the Roosters out at St Mary's on Sunday, I was able to catch that game. I couldn't stay and watch all of the New South Wales Cup game due to family commitments, but the Jersey Flegg a high quality, a really, really high quality game of football. The Roosters sitting on top of the table, big, fast, powerful. I think they're also at the older end of the under 21s age group as well. Really crack football team. The Eels went toe-to-toe with them.
Mm-hmm.
Young Eels team went toe-to-toe with them. Some great performances out there in the Eels lineup. Really, almost the entire team just, you couldn't speak highly enough of the effort that they put in there. It ended up losing, it was 5 tries to 3.
The scoreboard probably not reflective of the contest, wasn't it? 60s. There was a late try
not
where it looked like there was a foot or two on the sideline that helped the Roosters get it out, the 30 points. But yeah, great effort from a team that had been struggling for a bit of consistency, and they should take a lot out of that loss, even if they don't get the competition points.
Yeah, because as I said, they were giving away, I believe, size and age against a team that's really setting that competition alight, and I think the Roosters themselves were quite impressed with how the Eels performed against them. So I think it's probably made it a bit tough for them to qualify for finals football now, but still we move on. Mate, any main takes out of the selections this week?
Yeah, got a couple of players being shuffled around in this lineup. A bit of consistency there too as well. Talking about sort of returning players, Arthur Tweedles at fullback again, good to see. You got Komalafi and Ethan Martin, who's been a real ball of lightning, hasn't he? 60s for the Eels. He bagged the double on the weekend. He's on the other flank. Richard Penasini and Araz Namva in the centres. You got Blaze Talangi backing up, which is good to see. Long awaited return.
I tell you what, I just want to jump in there.
Yeah, go.
Some big moments from Blaze in that game. There was a tackle that he made on the Eels try line that just drove the Roosters player back. That was a try saver there. Just his strength of his runs, and then there was a great cutout pass for the first try that the Eels scored, which was by Matt Komalafi. He's a very, very good footballer, Blaze, and despite missing a huge amount of this season with injury, he's really stamped himself as a player that Eels supporters need to watch. So just wanted to jump in there. Sorry for interrupting.
No, and for Blaze, for the Eels and Blaze, it was a big what if, wasn't it? Because of how much football he's missed this year, both with the broken foot coming into the season, and then what was it, a busted rib from City versus Country? I think he did pretty serious damage against or in that rep game. So missed serious time, but he just comes back in stride, which is a testament to the class of the player himself. But he's in the halves alongside Ethan Sanders. Front row, you got Noah Reid and Tony Matelli. Matty Arthur is a dummy half. Lachlan Blackburn, who was in the centres last week, moves into the back row, which is where Raznava comes into the team. You got Max Tupou making his return with Nicholas Lenars captaining the team from lock forward. Another returnee, a big one, Saxon Pryke on the interchange. Lance Lima, Lachlan Mears Crab, and Sam Tuavaiti rounding it out. Paddy Spence is the reserve or 18th man. So yeah, this is a good team on paper again. 60s. Hope we can get some momentum out of it. As we always talk, it is to talk about momentum out of a loss. When you play that well against the best team in the competition, you should be taking momentum out of that. So if I can get that and spin it into something against the Melbourne Storm, and look, they probably need to win out from this point, 60s, to make it to the finals, and maybe need results go their way too. They are 4 points behind Melbourne, who is in 5th place. So this is a big one. This you have to have this one. You got the Dragons and Storm on 24 points, occupying 5th and 6th. So this one gets you within striking distance of the Storm at the very least the week after if you win. And then pending what's happening with the Dragons this week, let me just quickly check their draw. They take on the Manly Seagulls, who I'm pretty sure are terrible in this grade. So we might need a miracle there. Yeah, the Seagulls are one of 4 teams on the bottom of the ladder with 6 wins. So we need a big upset there.
Yeah. It's once you start talking mathematical and relying on results elsewhere, then that's not a good thing. I think have we still got a buy up our sleeves?
I believe we do. I'll quickly check that while we're chatting. If I just line up the Parramatta Eels here, they have.
I'll tell you what was costly is that when they last played the Storm was that it was a try, I think, with about 2.5 minutes to go to the Storm, where the Eels were leading through the game and just gave up that late try. And, of course, therefore the Storm got the victory up here at Kellyville. And, it was a disappointing way to end that, because I think from memory it was a turnover on a yardage carry in the around the quarter line that turned the ball over to the Storm with that short amount of time going. So unfortunate there, but they do get that opportunity to exact revenge. And if they can't make the finals themselves, then make it difficult for the Storm to make the finals.
And also the other thing too, if you're not making the finals, you may be playing for a spot in New South Wales Cup. We've seen the Eels be aggressive with player development right now. So if you can show a bit of spark and a bit of, I suppose, potential, you could end up playing senior football.
Yeah. Clint, quick take from you on Blaze.
Well, where to begin? I'm not going to lie, gents. He's someone that's been a favourite of mine since I first saw him on the field in Mats. I think we've all affectionately called him, and we don't want to heap too much pressure on him when I say this. This is a term of endearment when we say this, but Dylan Jr., I think we've all referred to him as that at some point. He's played a lot of 5'8", but more recently making a name for himself as centre, despite the fact he finds himself back in the 6 this week. But the reason we call him Dylan Jr. is because not only is he deceptively strong, but his running game and the way he's able to stand and break in tackles is very reminiscent of our first grade 5'8". So, I get excited every time I watch him play, because you just get the sense that you're watching a future first grader when he's on the field. So, despite the fact he's had an injury interrupted season, that he's been able to find the ability to not only win himself an SG Ball Cup earlier this year, but finding some form in Flegg now is exciting, and hopefully it's the launch pad for him to continue his development into even more senior grades of football following the off season of 23-24 and into the 24 season.
Yep. Now, and just before we go on to NRL news, just a couple of shout-outs from that game as well. Nick Lanaz, my goodness, what a tough competitor that bloke is. Was he named captain again this week?
Yes, got the C next
John?
to his name still, yeah.
Yeah, and I'd suggest for good reason, because he really is a competitor. He just both sides of the game, attack, defence. He's playing lock. We know he can jump in at dummy half, but then here's another one of the ones I wanted to give a shout out to. Budz Arthur he has arguably got the best pass delivery out of any player within the Eels club. He is a quality dummy half, and just his reading of the play is sensational. I also want to give a shout out to Big Lance, because in a match where it was a really big Roosters pack that he was up against, I thought he did a great job of taking some of those hard, tough carries into the Roosters pack. And look, to me, he was one of the standouts last week. He's had an excellent season, and he's in the SG Ball, and he's continuing it in the Jersey Flegg. Okay, NRL news, fellas. I want to start off with a little bit of, I'll call it a mini editorial. There was a lot of talk today around the RLPA and what's happening with their standoff with the NRL and the boycott around the media, and talk about extending the boycott to the Dally M. Now, we've had Peter V'landys come out and reckon that he can get the CBA sorted in 2 days. Well, then why are we at this stage right now? All this time down the track. The other thing is too, and I want to make this caveat. I have been in a position where I was a union delegate for probably somewhere in the 6 to 8 year time frame. That was in the Teachers Federation. I also then want to say that's not my go. I took that on behalf of the other teachers that were at the school, that it was a role that needed to be filled. I'm not a passionate union person in any way, but I also believe that you have to have a representation of workers, right? So, and I've been in the role on the other side of the coin where I've faced some rather aggressive, attempted strong arm tactics from some of the big unions in other jobs that I've had where I've been in a management position, and that wasn't pleasant either because it was quite confronting. So I've been on both sides, and what I witnessed today on 360 was an attempt to completely destabilise the RLPA. Now, I'm not saying that I'm backing the stance of the RLPA, but you can see the tactics coming through. What you saw today was the unnamed players that they say don't understand what the dispute is about, right? So you've got, look, there's players within the ranks. There's a lot of players within the ranks that don't understand what's going on. So first of all, you've got the easily identifiable tactic of your members don't agree with what you're doing. Big tick there. So they're looking to destabilise there. They're looking to pitch them against the RLPA leadership. It's a divide and conquer tactic. And who's the ones that are saying this, that are reporting it to the fans, telling the fans that the actions are, what did they say? That it's insulting to the fans, that what's going on, that there's no regard to the fans. What are we missing so far? We're missing match day media. And if the boycott for the Dally M doesn't go ahead, it's the players that are missing out on that. Well, that's not a big event for fans. Yeah, fans get to watch, but that's them celebrating their seasons, isn't it? The players. So this isn't an attack on the fans. The whole way, it's been something that the media has had to face. So when you've got the media reporting on this, and the media are telling the viewers that the players aren't giving respect to the fans, and that they're doing this divide and conquer tactic, it's so blatant.
Yeah, and unfortunately, some people will eat it up, and they will start turning on the players and blaming them for being greedy and selfish and divisive. But like you said, 60s, these are telltale signs and tactics of division. And the fact that the players were willing to get an independent mediator in to help, breach the gap, and the NRL, allegedly aren't interested in that. Again, it's another sign that I think one party is being non-compliant.
Yeah, and as I said, I'm at this stage, the problems that are going on as a fan, it's not impacting me. It really isn't. Like, I'm missing out on a little bit of match day. If I'm at the game, I'm missing nothing. Like, what are we missing out on if we're actually at the game? We're not getting any player input out there anyway. They're not grabbing players and putting them on the PA system at the ground. It's the television coverage that's missing out on the players there. And as I said, if the Dally M is boycotted, what skin is that off my nose as a supporter?
No more top hat speeches. Jeez.
Yeah, it's so. Yeah, I'm a little bit disappointed that we're continuing to see this. It's not unexpected, and I hope it's all sorted out. And as I said, it might sound as if I'm coming out all pro unions on this. No, that's not the case. But it's just so, the tactics are just so obvious looking at it, that it's that divide and conquer by one of the parties who is like the people who are reporting it have a vested interest in it. Like that's the most obvious thing, that the people reporting on it are the ones who are actually impacted, not the fans. The ones impacted by it are the media, because, I mean, the fans are getting all the interviews in the early part of the week. And I get that there's things that haven't been able to happen. Like there've been things around the NRLW that have been missed out on. There's been some milestone things that might have been good to cover as part of match days. I get that. I'm not ignoring that, but I'm just saying, for the most part, as a fan, I'm not impacted by this. So anything you fellas want to add to that now that my rant is over?
No, I think you summed it up pretty well for mine. Like you said, I fall into the same camp of not strongly pro-union, not strongly anti-union. They're very much in I'm not, like, even necessary evils is just a unfair way of badging it. Like, they are a necessity.
It's just keeping both parties on.
Exactly. And there will be 100% be unions that take advantage of their ability to strong arm, like Sixties mentioned. And there'll be some instances where, a union is absolutely fighting for the right thing. And I feel like this is far more a case of the latter, where, again, the sticking point isn't the straight up cap value. It's not the monetary value. It's about player welfare in the long term and securing certain entitlements and benefits that will help players beyond just their initial playing careers, as far as I understand, and that's certainly something that seems worth fighting for.
Yeah. Now I'm going to fire up again, and I'm just going to throw it to you fellas, and I'm not going to say anything more. Harry Grant.
Well. You mentioned 360s. I caught a little bit before we jumped online to record, and they had Reed Marnie and Josh Reynolds on as their player guests for the second part of the show. And they were talking about the MRC. And Reed was sort of trying to dance around it and not be put himself in a position where he can get into trouble, because obviously he's an active player. But Josh Reynolds sort of jumped in and said, no, I'll say it. They absolutely sort of play favourites and have different charges with different players. And goodness has in the last couple of weeks in the NRL made that, not like we didn't know, but has really put it in black and white, hasn't it, about who the haves and have-nots are of getting charged.
Yeah. Yep. Clint?
I watched the Melbourne Newcastle game last week, and I was discussing it with a friend of mine in real time, and I turned to him and said, "Guarantee he doesn't get a suspension out of that. Guarantee he doesn't." And you want to try and justify to me,
and maybe also guarantee that certain journos don't call it a dog act.
Yep. All of the hoo-ha and parades that seem to go along for certain clubs, and others who don't even get so much as a mouse squeaking, and it's incredibly frustrating, because we want to believe that there's parity and we want to believe that there's consistency, but it just is never forthcoming. And the incredibly frustrating aspect of this is that there is no one willing to come forward and explain why. We want to understand why it is, how it is you get to these determinations, how it is that you got to this grading, and then subsequently how it is you inferred that, and compared to similar incidents, and also using the legal term here, precedent, helped determine and inform that decision. Because not saying that the average rugby league punter knows everything, but it certainly doesn't pass their sniff test or the pub test, and that's why they're getting frustrated. And I don't want to speak out of turn on your gentleman's behalf, but at the same time, like we just want to understand what it is that's helping guide these decisions, and it just seems to be pluck a punishment out of the hat, and there seems to be a have-nots hat and a haves hat, and being an Eels fan, it certainly feels as though our punishments get plucked out of the have-nots hat.
Yeah, and it's easy, I think, for us to be excused for looking at the different punishments that's handed out and not being fired up about. I mean, it makes no sense. It makes no sense because you've got the focus that's put on Eels players who are punished and punished quite significantly. And you had the scenario where I think Brent Reed, as a journalist, was saying he thought it was a bit harsh, with others saying they thought it was really quite soft on Reg to get 4 weeks. I mean, 4 weeks.
Yeah, I know.
Like 4 weeks for an act that was obviously like a bit of laziness. There wasn't any.
It was clumsy.
It was clumsy. Like there was nothing in that where there was malice. Where the bloke was. It wasn't like he came charging in and slid along the ground with his knees extending into someone's rib cage. I think you know where I'm going there with that. And it was just awkward. It was clumsy. It was stupid. I'll add that in there. I'll add a bit of criticism of Reg there. In that moment, it was a really silly thing to do. Like he lost focus. Right then, he just let, whether it was fatigue or laziness, whatever the case may be, he allowed himself to do something which was never gaining anything out of it. There was never going to be anything to gain from it. And whether it was a mistimed flop or what have you, it just wasn't good enough from him. So we don't hold back in any criticism there. But the fact that something similar can happen and it's not called out by journos and it's not punished in any significant form, it just shows that there are double standards that are out there and it's there for everyone to see. But the thing is, the media who control the narrative, they're not calling that out. They're not calling out a double standard because their coverage is part of the double standard. So when you're talking about when you have Josh Reynolds, who's on there on the very program that really showcased some double standards, he's on there. He's saying there's double standards. And he's saying it to the program which has some double standards in the way that the journos who are panelists there talk about it. Anyway.
It's all beautifully meta, isn't it?
Oh. Now, the next one to talk about, you had Gordon Tallis fired up about the fact that Nico Hines was not given the same harsh punishment as what Reece Walsh was for abuse of the official. And basically the point that Tallis was making was that there may not have been the language involved, but there is still the questioning, the inappropriate questioning of the decision-making of the official. I think he's maybe drawing a slightly long bow in this one. But what do you fellas think, Clint?
Look, I also saw this game in real time, and my initial reaction watching it was, this is a player who's feeling the pressure of his team not performing, getting frustrated that he's having a bad day at the office and things aren't quite working out against an opponent they were expected to beat at home. That's initially the vibe that I got. Should he have abused the official? I use the inverted commas abuse because I don't know exactly what it was that he said, but he was quite obviously animated and fired up. Sometimes that happens in the heat of battle. I'm not saying it's appropriate, and nor am I supporting those actions. But at the same time, in high stakes, high competitive sports, sometimes that's what happens. But I still do think that it's not something that we should condone, and likewise, it is something that should be subject to punishment, and we have to be consistent, like we were discussing with the Harry Grant RCG comparison. It's something that we need to have visibility over, so that we can stop all of these discussions around what's fair and what isn't. You know, and I get that as part of the drama of rugby league, and part of what gets people talking about it. But at the same time, like if we want to have true equity in the game, we want to have true parity with a lot of these scenarios. It needs to be definable and easily understood by everyone who views the game. So that way, we all know what to expect. And most importantly, the players and officials know exactly what to expect when any given transgression takes place.
Yep. John, your thoughts on the Nicho Hynes?
Yeah, I think you're probably right about. I love Gordy, and I don't always agree with his football takes, but I do enjoy how he presents him. I feel like he is, very much down to earth, salt of the earth sort of, opinion pundit. But yeah, he
He
probably
appeals to the everyman.
he does, yeah. And like Gordy is good value, but like I said, I don't always agree with him. I feel like he probably did draw a bit of a long bow here, and I do agree with Quint. Nicho, I think, is a player that is feeling the heat. He's been set up, and it's not his fault. The media did a very. This is like
him up,
tall poppy syndrome 101 in the Australian media. They're the best at it in the world. They built him up to be the next face of the game, the pin-up boy, the poster boy, and now that the pressure's on, they can tear him down. And the Sharks are struggling. There is no doubt about that. There's been a lot of fan content about how much they've played or how much they struggled against top 8 teams, and the fact that I think not only have they struggled against top 8 teams, but they've got the same amount of wins as the Tigers against top 8 teams in recent seasons. So they're struggling. There's no doubt about that. And Nicho lashed out in the heat of the moment. I don't think it was in the same ballpark as what Reece did, because Reece was not only a singular incident, it was a protracted campaign against the referee that culminated in a real bit of verbal diarrhea with like some big expletives used in that case. And that wasn't...
And some straight up lying.
Yeah, exactly.
In the aftermath.
And in the aftermath and the collaboration between players to get stories on the same page in order to, fabricate a narrative. So there obviously were layers to what Reece Walsh did. Nicho made a mistake, and like Clint said, you shouldn't be tolerating that sort of stuff and setting that sort of example. So maybe he could have been punished a little bit more, but by the same token, nowhere near what Reece Walsh got.
Yeah. Last couple of things to talk about. First of all, Reed Marnie. Now, we had the extraordinary situation where he was moved to the bench for the Bulldogs game against the Panthers. It came out afterwards that he'd had a bit of a back issue and that he still wanted to play. So they simply reduced his minutes and had him playing as a middle lock for like about 27 minutes of the game. Look, I still find that extraordinary that if someone who is a dummy half and is a small dummy half is first of all incapable of playing, that they supposedly agree to his wishes and let him play incapacitated. So a small player incapacitated and out of position.
Well,
as an impact forward off the bench.
Doesn't spell duty of care, does it?
Well, it's not only that. If we talk about Nicho feeling the heat of some struggles in form and whatnot, then surely Cameron Ciraldo, his moves have been motivated by the same sort of pressure, because what do we see in that? They got absolutely pumped by the Panthers, who put the Q on the rack. And we saw a team that had their fullback, these are the name players, their fullback go into the halves, their half go to dummy half, their dummy half moved to the interchange to play a middle forward role. The Bulldogs are the burden of expectation, I think, for a club as storied and as proud as the Bulldogs, whose identity is built around being competitive, not necessarily being, the competition challenges every year, but being competitive. This is such a long stretch where they've been the complete opposite. They are the whipping boys of the NRL. If it weren't for a select set of other clubs, headlined obviously by the West Tigers, but not withstanding stuff like the Dragons, I feel like the Dogs would be getting pummeled in the press. And the Reed Marnie thing is just bizarre. If he was healthy enough to play as a middle forward, he was healthy enough to start a dummy half. What really is going on there?
Well, I guess maybe you've already touched on it. with regard to the focus that would be on the Bulldogs if they were certain other clubs, because how do you explain some of those selection decisions that Cameron Ciraldo has made there? And look, there was a lot of love for Cameron Ciraldo before the season started. There was a lot of love for him last year when he was being courted by everyone. He was highly regarded as assistant coach at the Panthers. The other assistant coach is doing mighty fine work over there at the Warriors, and we may well give that a bit more of a chat next week in the news podcast. But he was certainly talked up, and there were all these talks about what he was doing for the culture of the Bulldogs, and what you're seeing is bizarre decisions. You're having people talking about the culture's obviously wrong at the Bulldogs, but he seems to be escaping any of the genuine heat that's there. I think Bulldog supporters have got reason to be able to question what is going on there. And Clint, when the Eels didn't sign Reid Marnie, when they didn't really match, they decided not to fully match what the Bulldogs were offering. And we found out a little bit about that after it was all over, the extent that the Eels were prepared to go to. And I was quite animated in my discussions with people, not online, but as you both recall, I said to you, I was upset when the Eels offer went to a certain amount because I didn't believe that Reid
That's true.
was worth that amount based on, and that this isn't a personal comment on Reid, it was based on what he had delivered in previous seasons, because they'd never really got a full season out of Reid. There'd been injury concerns that were there and some fluctuations in form. And I said that the Bulldogs were offering an enormous amount, like putting him right up near the top of the payments to dummy halves in the NRL, based on top of the tree potential, like him fulfilling every ounce of potential and more. And that there hadn't really been the evidence of that in previous seasons to back it up. And I said, even the Eels are paying him on potential and not on delivered performances to that point in time. Looking back on it now, in retrospect, I'm very comfortable with the stance that I took there. I'm very comfortable with the fact that the Eels weren't able to secure him. And I think Reid, from his own career, has maybe made an awful call in terms of his football development in going to the Bulldogs. Maybe in the long run it might turn out to be the right one. But I think he's been able to take the money now, and I'm not sure if it's going to do him the world of good being over there. Clint, your thoughts?
This I couldn't agree more with you at the time, and I couldn't agree more with you now. I was very comfortable in how that transpired, and that we weren't caught up having any more back and forth offers there, because the money just got crazy. For exactly the reasons you touched on. And I can't help but think of an episode of Classic Simpsons with this, when Bart Simpson sells his soul for $5 and then spends the majority of the episode realizing that the value of it is a lot more than the $5 he sold it to Millhouse for, and trying to redeem himself. And I don't want to be as dramatic to suggest that Reid necessarily did that. But I use that analogy to highlight the fact that you have to strike a healthy balance between getting paid good money and getting paid your worth, but also being in the side that's competitive and taking the personal well-being aspect into it. Now, you can't always anticipate how well a team's going to perform every single year, but you got a rough idea of what the level of competitiveness that you're entering into in any given season and any given squad, because at best they're probably capable of this. At worst, this is probably where we'll end up. every team has a rough guide of it, and they always hope for the best and aim for the best, and they land where they land based on a number of influencing factors. For Reid, he would have been aware that going over to Canterbury, that best case scenario, we may just sneak into the semis if all things go right and the stars align. And it'll probably be like that for the next 2 to 3 seasons of your 4-year deal, and maybe by year 4, if everything's come together, we might be a shot of being a big swinger. Whereas alternatively, he knew staying at Parramatta for it's going to be less. My pocket's going to take a hit, but geez, my well-being is going to be good because at worst I'll probably be on the cusp of the finals, and at best I might be challenging for a premiership and enhancing my own value longer term as a result of that. Use the career of Api Koriasau as comparison at this particular point in time. Another hooker who was off contract at the end of last year and switched clubs. He had already won 3 premierships, one at South Sydney and 2 back-to-back with Penrith. I don't think anyone begrudges him going for the money. I'm sure he doesn't necessarily mind staying with the Tigers. In fact, he extended with them only recently in the last fortnight. He's probably earned the right to go, you know what, I'm going to get paid. And whatever happens at this point. I've got a career that I can already look back on and be happy with. And I've achieved everything I could pretty much hope to achieve in this game. From here on, I need to set myself up for retirement being an older player. Alternatively, you've got Reid, who's certainly in the early part of his career by comparison, who's made a money decision that may have longer term effects on not only his success in the game, but his future earning capacity. So, the decision isn't necessarily a poor one per se in terms of some of the logic applied, but in terms of the sequencing and timing in his career, I absolutely think it's a poor one. And, you reap what you sow with that. And as you said before, Sixties, it may very well work out for him. We don't know what the future holds, and we don't have crystal balls. But, at this particular point in time, the picture that's being painted isn't the greatest, and he's got to live with that decision.
Yeah. And still on the Bulldogs, and we'll wrap up with this, John, their manic recruitment, retention, and shedding of players shows no evidence of slowing up in any way, shape, or form. It's insane. And there's plenty of rumours out there about what's going on and where the cap's at and that sort of thing. What can you say?
Well, again, seeing what we're seeing with the Bulldogs and their frenzied, manic, almost bizarre recruitment strategy is testament to the fact that the NRL is never going to actively search for any discrepancies in the way caps are managed, because the Dogs are playing so fast and loose. Like, they are signing people up to big money and then telling them they can go a year later. We got Fatala Mariner, who was just made club captain, who's allegedly been told he is free to find a new home. Ryan Sutton, who they just picked up for this year, likewise has apparently been told he can, find a new employer elsewhere. They've just picked up Blake Taff and Liam Knight. They've been linked or either have signed CSI Takiaho, a 32-year-old, to a 2-year, $500,000 per year deal. And they obviously need to beef up their middle, but it's reckless. I don't know, given what we know that some of their numbers of players are between recruitment and then upgrades and retention for guys like Burton, how they are funding this spending spree, because if you're telling guys to leave, you're footing the bill. There is no club that's going to say that for Fatala Mariner and the Bulldogs, we're taking on the full contract. Canterbury are going to have to eat a significant portion of that in dead cap. So I have no idea, but it is, on the one hand, it's entertaining because they just are so aggressive and reckless with their recruitment, but it's not helping at all. But on the other hand, it's a bit frustrating that the NRL is okay with both this and the whole pub share clause that was put into the Payne Haas offer. So, yeah, part of me is enjoying it. Part of me is it smells real funny.
Yeah, it really, if there is not, and we're not privy to what the NRL is going to do in terms of going into a club and doing investigations, but you'd have to think that there has to be some level of salary cap auditing that's going on of the Bulldogs. If the NRL are failing to do that, then they're basically running a joke of an organisation. Like, there is no due diligence whatsoever in their salary cap policing if they're not jumping straight in there. As you said, like, it's almost reckless abandon, the contracts that are going on over there. It's they're literally mentioned when it comes to any player that's coming off contract. They're mentioned as one of the suitors. And you know what? There's actually, like, when we used to have that with Parramatta, it was essentially because player agents were using it quite often to bump up that there's big money that's after a particular player that was under their management. But in this instance, there's justification for it because the Bulldogs are jumping in with big money offers for a lot of the players.
They're linked to Jerome Luai now, Payne Haas, so they're in the market for big time players, and yet they've got plenty of investment in their current roster. Like, Reid Money didn't go over on peanuts. We literally just covered that. You got Burton, Tavita Pungai Jr., the Pong, Addo Carr, all these players across the park. And yeah, like I said, it doesn't. You're not going to make.
And you know what? If any of them say that they've gone for a particular amount which looks suspiciously low, if the NRL's not all over that, especially when it comes to what was being proposed with the Laundy pub share bizarro world offer or suggested offer, as I said, there is a lack of due diligence that's going on there. So, look, fellas, that pretty much rounds things out at the moment.
I do have a quick thing I wanted to chat about, boys, and it's not NRL related. I don't know how many of you follow football in the classical sense, the soccer round ball version, but some waves today or yesterday with Kylian Mbappe getting a reasonable contract offer, Sixties. I don't know if you've seen this. Have you heard about this one?
No, I haven't.
So when you talk about finding your Saudi prince, Mbappe has just received an offer to the tune in US dollars of $775 million for a single year to play in the Saudi Arabian Football League. So to put that in perspective, 60s, that on a current exchange rate is roughly 1.15 billion Australian dollars. The current NRL salary cap for a given team is 12.1. To fund the entire NRL in a given year is just under $206 million in terms of player salaries. So Mbappe, he could bankroll the NRL for a few years after 1 year in Saudi Arabia. Like, how crazy is that sort of number? Like, even as like a length of like multi-year contract, that would be crazy. 1 year, $1.15 billion Australian.
There's obviously big money on offer over there.
Could you say no?
I would just like to take this opportunity for a public service announcement to all of our listeners in Abu Dhabi and Qatar that I am available. I can do a pro rata basis. A little bit for me, a little bit for you. I'll spend 3 weeks of the month over there, and
Sports,
you give me a week back in
media,
Australia, and
entertainment, whatever you need.
I'm available.
I've heard that Clint G has a lethal right foot. So any billionaires over there, oil billionaires.
I don't even have to go on the field. I'll just go work for your business. I mean, really, it's up to you. Whatever you want me to do, Saudi princes and business people.
Hang on, Clint. Be very, very careful. You've just said whatever they want you to do. You might get some interesting offers. Maybe if you've got those sort of offers, don't try to get in touch with Clint through the Cumberland Throw. We don't necessarily want to peddle in any sort of flesh trade that's going on there. We'll maybe
Sports
put
administrative services, to be specific.
We'll put out your email address on your private socials, mate. Look, just to wrap up this week, my big question for the week ahead is, we're playing this week. The Eels are playing a team renowned for the wrestle, the niggle, pushing the rules to the limit. Can we get past our season average of 4.4 penalties this game? Quick straw poll, fellas, yes or no?
I think my life says everything you need to know about that one, mate. We're going to get absolutely reamed in the penalty count this week, and there's not much we can do about it.
Yeah, Clint.
I'm shaking up the 8 ball, and it says outlook not so good.
Yeah. No, I'm going to make a bold call. We'll get 5 penalties this week.
Whoa!
Just to
Mr.
nudge it
Big
up
Spender.
by, a couple, maybe a couple of hundredths in the season average. Hey, fellas, thank you again for tonight. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Thank you to Big Swing Golf at Northmead, to Star Partners Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta. And one last thing, go you mighty Eels.